I still remember the smell of the old cedar in the hallway, the way the floors creaked no matter how many times we tried to repair them, and the dust motes that would swirl in dancing beams of sunlight through every window. My childhood home was far from perfect. It had chipped paint, a rusted mailbox, and a roof that leaked whenever there was a heavy storm, but it was mine, and it was where I believed my fondest memories were stored. My parents knew how attached I was to that house. They knew every corner held a piece of my heart. They also knew that if they sold it without my permission, I'd be devastated. But perhaps they forgot the other side of me, how relentless I become when someone tries to take away what I love. I first learned about the sale the day I returned from a year abroad. I'd been stationed in Singapore, part of a cultural exchange program that opened the door to the professional world. I'd always dreamed of entering international public relations. Throughout the year, I'd called home dutifully to check in. My parents were never warm, never affectionate, but it was still our ritual. Our calls usually comprised them telling me how hectic things were on their end, and me recounting my experiences in Asia. They rarely asked for details about my life, and I never provided more information than they asked for. We were all used to surface-level conversations. I thought that was just how our family operated, a polite performance of caring, rather than a genuine act. I landed on a crisp autumn afternoon, burdened by an unshakable heaviness that always accompanied me whenever I returned to the States. Maybe it was dread. Maybe it was just a sense of guilt that I could leave them behind and feel fine about it most of the time. When I finally made my way home, my childhood home, I discovered the locks had been changed. My immediate thought was that I must be mistaken. Perhaps my mother or father had lost their keys again and had decided to install new locks. The sun glinted off the fresh metal as I walked up the porch steps. I noticed the nails on the wooden railing had been hammered in again. There was fresh white paint over areas that had been scuffed for years. The place looked oddly revamped. That's when I spotted a generic wreath on the front door. My mother never bothered with wreaths outside of the holiday season, and this was no holiday wreath, just a bland floral ring that looked like it came straight from a department store. I knocked, my heartbeat rising. As I peered through the window, I could see a set of unfamiliar shoes and a neat row of coats hanging inside. Panic and confusion jostled in my chest. This wasn't my family. A muffled voice asked, "Who is it?" Before I had time to respond, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with dark hair. She wore a polite but slightly startled smile. Hi, I said, my hands trembling. This is my house. I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Emily Bartlett. She blinked twice, politely but guardedly. You mean the previous owners of this house were named Bartlett? We moved in a few weeks ago. Are you a relative? Yes, I'm their daughter, I murmured. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. No one told me the house had been sold. A flash of sympathy crossed her face, but she kept her posture firm, as though she expected me to barge in. I'm so sorry. I wouldn't know the details, but we purchased this place through a real estate agent. The sale was finalized about a month ago. I assumed the old owners had informed everyone in their family. My vision blurred. A dull roar filled my ears. They'd sold the house. My parents had sold my childhood home. The same parents who always gave me grief about how I should stay loyal to my roots, how I should never forget where I came from, had sold the only place that could literally prove where I came from. I forced a smile, mumbled some apology, and backed away from the porch. Adrenaline surged in my legs, but my brain couldn't decide whether to run or collapse. My phone was buzzing repeatedly in my purse. When I finally checked it, I saw a series of frantic texts from my mother. We're at the new place. Don't bother with the old house. We'll explain everything. Explain everything? Were they waiting for me, or were they just trying to preempt my meltdown? I had so many questions, so many accusations, and so many demands for clarity. With no other option, I lugged my heavy suitcase to the curb and called a taxi to take me to their new address. An address I discovered only when I scrolled up through older texts that I'd barely glanced at while I was still abroad. They hadn't seemed urgent at the time. Now, with the driver weaving through traffic, every second felt like an eternity. My breath caught in my throat with each question that raced through my mind. Were they in financial trouble? Were they forced to sell? Or worse, did they do this intentionally, to blindside me? I couldn't fathom, which was more painful. When we finally pulled up in front of a sleek condominium complex, something inside me turned ice cold. The building boasted modern architecture, tinted glass windows, and a smug, expensive aura. Of course, my parents always complained about how old and time-worn our house was. They resented how hard it was to keep up with. But it was ours. We had roots there. This new place, all slick lines and soulless edges, looked like the last place they'd ever choose unless they wanted an immediate improvement of status or convenience. I stormed up to the unit number they had texted me. The door was ajar, and from inside I heard the clink of champagne glasses. My mother must have been in the midst of toasting something. Anger pulsed in my cheeks. They'd sold my childhood home and were now celebrating. I shoved the door open and marched into a modern living room. My mother, Annette, turned around, champagne glass in hand. She wore an elegant blouse, her hair styled in a way that made her look younger than her 50-some years. My father, Richard, was perched on the arm of an enormous white sofa. He had that placid, unreadable expression he always wore when he wanted to mask the slightest discomfort. They both froze when they saw me. "Well," my mother said, setting her glass down, "you're here." "Yes, I am," I said, my voice trembling. "But apparently, I'm not at all home anymore, am I?" My father stood up slowly, spreading his arms, as if to invite me into some twisted hug that I absolutely did not want. "We've been meaning to talk to you about that." I couldn't hold back the low, bitter laugh that formed in my throat. Funny, because selling the house is something you usually talk about with your daughter before you do it, not after. They exchanged glances, neither wanting to be the first to speak. Finally, my mother sighed as though this whole situation was an unfortunate inconvenience for her. "Emily, we tried calling and texting you countless times. We told you we were planning on downsizing. It's not like you've been around to take care of that old place. It was becoming a money sink. You're always traveling, always focusing on your career. So why would you care if we sold it?" I stared at her, incredulous. "I care because it's my childhood home, Mum. I have memories in every room, every piece of furniture, every beam of that house. You know, that's the only place I feel truly grounded. And you didn't bother to wait until I came back, or at least run it by me. You sold it while I was halfway around the world." My voice cracked, and tears threatened to surface, but I fought them back. My father cleared his throat. "Your mother's right, you weren't here. We needed to make decisions. The market was good. We got an excellent deal. This is better for everyone." "For everyone?" I looked from my mother's stony face to my father's. "How is this better for me?" Silence. The tension thickened, coiling between us like a living thing. My mother's lips tightened. My father's eyes dropped to the floor. They both knew that I'd always wanted the chance to buy that house from them when I had enough money. Years ago, my father had even joked, "We'll keep it for you until you're ready." Now, apparently, that had been a lie. I spun on my heel and left before I could say anything else, something that might destroy whatever thin thread held our family together. They called after me, but I refused to stop. The tears I'd barely kept at bay finally spilled down my cheeks as I stepped into the elevator. My reflection in the sleek doors showed a woman on the verge of unraveling. What stung most wasn't the sale itself, but the final confirmation that my parents could discard my sentiments without a second thought. I'd always wondered if they truly cared about anything beyond their own comfort and appearances. Now, I knew. I spent the next few days bouncing between hotels, partially for lack of a better option, and partially because I couldn't bring myself to accept any help from them. But hotels were expensive. I was a freelance consultant for an international PR firm. I made good money, but I had to be mindful. I had no permanent home in the city, having given up my small apartment lease before moving abroad. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. My parents had effectively left me homeless in my own hometown. One night, I found myself huddled over my laptop in the dimly lit corner of a budget hotel room, scrolling through real estate listings of my childhood home, photos of the interior that had been taken during the staging. My old room had been stripped of its personality, repainted into a chic pastel palette. Gone were my pictures of my high school musicals and soccer trophies. The window seat, where I'd read books until midnight, was bare, save for a decorative cushion. The house was staged to look like the quintessential suburban dream, free of any personal history. Anger boiled inside me. I didn't just want to brood, I wanted revenge. And not something petty, like ignoring my parents' calls or posting angry messages on social media. I wanted them to feel, for once in their lives, that sense of displacement, betrayal, and heartbreak they'd casually thrust upon me. But how? Then a thought struck me, an idea so unexpected and outlandish that I sat there, half terrified by my own boldness. I'd build a community centre, or an arts centre, a foundation somewhere that would become the emotional heart of the neighbourhood, somewhere open and free, that championed the opposite values of what my parents lived for. If I couldn't have my old house, then I'd at least reshape the neighbourhood in a way that overshadowed everything my parents had done. They thrived on appearances. Well, I'd make an appearance that would eclipse them entirely. It wouldn't be easy. I'd have to raise funds, navigate permits. But I had contacts from my work in international PR wealthy philanthropic individuals who loved a new challenge. I'd seen how these fundraising projects worked, how communities could rally together when they believed in something bigger. And now, battered by heartbreak, I believed in something bigger with every fibre of my being. I spent days drafting proposals, pouring my grief into the keyboard. I'd call it the Hidden Roots Centre, an homage to those memories buried beneath years and structural changes. I started a crowdfunding campaign, wrote moving blog posts that told the story of how I lost my childhood home and how I wanted to transform that loss into something that would bring people together. My tears literally splashed on the keyboard at times, fueling each poignant word. At first, my campaign didn't attract much traction. I'd posted it to my professional network, but philanthropic interest doesn't always come quickly. Then, one of my old college friends, Cara, stumbled on it and offered to help spread the word. She worked at a local news station and pitched the story to her boss. Before I knew it, I was being interviewed about how my parents sold my childhood home while I was abroad, and how that heartbreak inspired me to fight for the community. I cried on air, real tears that I'd never shown the world, and apparently that raw vulnerability touched a nerve. Donations began trickling in. When I asked my parents for support, all I got was an irritated sigh from my father. "Emily, you're making a spectacle," he scolded. "It's one thing to lose the house, but it's another to turn this into some big public show." A hot wave of anger threatened to consume me, but I forced it down. "You're welcome to join us," I said. "It's a community event. Maybe you can see what we're trying to do with the old neighbourhood." My mother cut in with that haughty tone she reserved for special occasions. "We'll see if we can make time. But we're in the middle of important personal business. We can't just drop everything for your charity event." I didn't push the issue. If they didn't show up, fine. But I would, and so would everyone else who'd grown to care about this project. I wanted them to witness the wave of support, to see how powerfully an idea rooted in love could bloom. The morning of the fundraiser was bright but bitterly cold. A crisp wind rustled through the trees that line the old street. Nina and her husband placed a banner across the tall hedges at the front of the yard, bringing Hidden Roots to life. Folding tables offered homemade baked goods, hot chocolate, and little crafts for kids. I'd even arranged a small acoustic set from local musicians who wanted to support the cause. People began filtering in, and to my surprise, they lingered. They read about the centre's mission on the pamphlets I'd designed and talked with me personally. Many recalled the old house from their youth, the block party memory, the tree house in the backyard. They donated more generously than I dared to hope. 2 hours into the event, I was brimming with cautious optimism. The donation jar was filling up, and my online campaign was seeing a spike. Then, I spotted them, my parents, standing awkwardly at the edge of the lawn. My mother wore a tailored coat, my father a stiff expression that made him look constipated. They hovered near the refreshments but didn't touch anything. Possibly they were trying to see how many neighbours recognized them. I wanted to ignore them, but the tension in my stomach refused to loosen until I confronted them. I approached, half expecting them to scold me for publicly flaunting our family drama. Instead, my mother looked me up and down and said, "You look tired." I was too numb to be offended. "I haven't been sleeping much," I said simply. My father cleared his throat. We came because we're concerned about you, Emily. This crusade, are you sure you're thinking everything through? Building a centre like this is a lot of responsibility. It is, I agreed, but I know what I'm doing. I've done my research. I've got a good support system. I could feel the presence of Nina behind me, listening quietly. I took a deep breath. Are you here to criticize me? Or are you here to show some genuine support? They exchanged a look. My mother's face flickered with the faintest hint of guilt. We're just trying to understand, she replied. We didn't realize how strongly you'd react about the house. A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Then you never understood me at all. I felt a wave of cold anger. But if you'd like to open your checkbooks, the donation jar is that way, I pointed. I didn't mean to be so abrupt, but I was at my emotional limit. They had sold my home. They had withheld any compassion or understanding. And now, when I was fighting to build something meaningful, they dared to act like they were worried about me, as if I might be making a fool of myself. My father's jaw tightened. The moment felt loaded like a string pulled to its breaking point. Finally, he shook his head, glanced at my mother, then walked away, leaving her standing there. She stood rooted in place for a moment, staring after him. Then, with a sigh, she followed. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Strangely, I felt no sadness, only a calm resolution. If they wanted to walk out on me, on my life, on my dreams, so be it. I would find fulfillment and family in those who supported me wholeheartedly. Over the next months, the Hidden Root Centre became more than a concept. The funds rolled in more quickly than I anticipated, boosted by local press and word-of-mouth support from neighbours, Nina, and my growing team of volunteers. We secured a location a few streets away from my old home, a quaint, disused building that had once been a church. It had a large main area that we converted into a multi-purpose hall, plus a few side rooms for after-school programs, group therapy sessions, art classes, and more. Every nail hammered, every coat of paint applied, reminded me of the house I'd lost. But I poured that longing into this new place. I'd create new memories here, memories that would become equally precious. Oddly enough, once the sale of our home was done, my parents seemed to regret it. I heard rumours through neighbours apparently. My parents wanted to sell their condominium because the fees were too high. The place came with all sorts of hidden costs, maintenance, security, taxes. They ended up in a precarious financial situation because they'd bought the modern condo with the assumption they'd have a comfortable safety net from the sale of our old house. But they'd underestimated the monthly expenses, the cost of living in such a prestigious building. They also discovered that many of the residents were older retirees who didn't appreciate the presence of new neighbours, who weren't wholly polite or neighbourly. In short, my parents found themselves isolated, with no real sense of community. I suppose that was one of those unanticipated twists of life. The bigger or shinier something looks, the more likely it might be hollow inside. We cut the ribbon in front of an enthusiastic crowd, including local journalists, supportive friends, and neighbours. I gave a short, heartfelt speech about how the Hidden Root Centre was meant to embrace the stories of those who felt overlooked, to offer a welcoming space for children, teens, and adults alike. We all have places that shaped us, I said into the microphone, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. But what matters isn't the building itself, it's the bonds we form with each other. Here, we hope to forge those bonds that can't be torn apart by a for sale sign. Applause erupted. Tears welled up in my eyes, tears of gratitude. In that moment, I realized I wasn't alone, and I never had to be. I'd allowed my parents' coldness to make me feel unworthy of real, human connection. But all around me stood people who believed in the same dream, who shared my vision. They hugged me, congratulated me, and told me how proud they were. More than a few had grown up in tough homes, with distant parents, and found solace in the sense of community the Hidden Root Centre was offering. It was more than I could have ever asked for. I spotted movement near the back of the crowd. My father's tall frame was easy to recognize, and my mother stood beside him. They were out of place, fidgeting uncomfortably. I wondered what had brought them here. A sense of dread pricked my heart, but as I stepped off the small stage, they approached. My mother spoke first, in a voice as fragile as I'd ever heard it. Emily, congratulations. This is a beautiful place you've created. I studied her face, searching for the usual mask of disdain or condescension. It wasn't there. My father shifted his weight. "We wanted to apologize," he said quietly. I never should have sold the house without telling you first. We just thought it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. And we didn't see how it would hurt you so deeply." He swallowed hard, his gaze falling to the floor. "We were wrong. There was a time when I would have hurled cold words back at them, refused to accept any apology. But I realized, as people around me bustled, smiling, hugging, that I had moved beyond the narrow confines of petty vengeance. My true revenge was my success, my capacity to build a home for others. And if that success could also pave the way for genuine healing, then maybe that was worth the risk of opening my heart again, even just a little. I appreciate your apology," I said softly. "But you have to understand, I can't pretend everything is back to normal. What you did, it hurt me in a way. I'm still grappling with. Selling the house wasn't just about the building. It was about dismissing me, my connection to our family. I'm trying to build something new for myself now, and that's what matters to me." My father nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "We understand. And we see how strong you are, how strong you've always been. We just never took the time to tell you." Tears stung my eyes again, but not from sorrow. I gave them a small smile. "I suppose I learned that strength from somewhere. Maybe you showed it to me, in a roundabout way." The tension broke with a shaky laugh escaping my lips. "Anyway, I'm not saying everything's forgiven overnight. But thank you for coming. If you'd like to help out, we're always looking for volunteers." My mother blinked, then nodded. "We'll talk. Maybe we can find a way to be part of this." Her words came out uncertain, as though stepping onto uncharted ground, and that was enough for me, enough to know the door was open, even if just slightly. The rest would be up to them. In my moments of quiet reflection, I realized my old house was always a symbol. It symbolized what I thought family should be: warmth, shared memories, love. That structure meant everything to me, so losing it felt like losing a part of my soul. But perhaps its sale was the catalyst that forced me to define home for myself, rather than rely on my parents' half-hearted illusions. Sometimes, when all is quiet and I lock up the Hidden Root Center late at night, I pause in the echoing silence of the hall, listening to my own footsteps. In those footsteps, I can almost hear the promise of redemption, the laughter of children who'll walk through these doors tomorrow, and the whispers of every dream that I no longer leave behind. I suppose that's what reclaiming your power feels like, transforming devastation into hope, forging a home from shattered pieces, and offering it generously to anyone who has ever felt lost. No house, no deed, no betrayal can take that kind of power away. And that finally is the real triumph.